throughout his life, he was promoted by extremely wealthy and extremely powerful people, including Lorenzo de' Medici in Florence, or during his time in Milano from the family of Sforza. In fact, Sforza, at the time that Leonardo was working for him, was actually engaged in a war against Venice. So he actually told Leonardo, look, I mean, you have some bright ideas, but, what I would like you to do, and I will fund, your art, is for you to develop some couple of things which I can actually use in war. So this is what Leonardo did. And he did that also for the Borgia family. And Cesare Borgia was also a warlord, and he rampaged all over Italy. So the question is, how free was he actually? And did he buy his freedom to be able to do certain things by selling his soul, as some might say, in other fields? So we're talking about this idea of the golden age of natural science because some of the things that we've discussed today and some of the things that have been presented might create the misimpression that everything is going terribly wrong and everything was a lot better in the past and we're going down the wrong road, and if that's so, what can we do about it? So I've tried to have a different perspective. So if we go on, there's something which the first speaker actually already mentioned, which is called the years of the scientific revolution. And in fact, the scientific revolution, as it's defined, started off with Nicholas Copernicus and his thesis about heliocentrism, so that the Earth actually revolves around the sun and not the other way around. And it ended with Sir Isaac Newton, as you're all familiar with, being in Cambridge, with his grandiose work Principia, which he published in 1687, which defines and describes the universal laws of gravitation and the three laws of motion. In between that, there was also another chap called Galileo Galilei. What actually happened here, and how free were they to actually do their research and to be great astronomers and great observers? Well, you will see that it's no surprise that actually the work for which Copernicus is most famous for actually got published when he died. Okay, because he didn't actually dare to publish the fact that he thought that the Earth actually revolves around the sun, because that was not something that the church would have accepted. So he was afraid, so he didn't read it. Galilei actually took that up later on in Dialogo and Discorsi. And once Dialogo actually got published in 1630, as you'd seen from the first speaker, he was actually put in front of the Holy Inquisition, and although he repented and said, everything was wrong, and it wasn't the way it is, and I think I made a huge mistake, he actually, at the end of the day, ended up dying under house arrest in 1642. And it only took a mere 350 years for the Vatican to actually rehabilitate it. So again, the question is, even in the golden age that we say it was all so much better in the past, was it really? And was it really much different? So from these things, I would like to have my first postulate, and the postulate is that natural science, and I'm not talking about philosophy, I'm talking about natural science, has always worked within certain constraints and for specific goals, in parentheses, of those who fund it. Okay. So if we move on into the natural science since the 1900s, then something has changed. And what has changed is that natural science, much like politics, has actually become a career path. So as soon as it becomes a career, it has certain consequences. The consequence is that you need to make a living out of it. So it does matter what you do, because you might not be able to earn your next month's salary, which means that you have this push for publish or perish. So if you don't publish, you won't get your next funding. So in a way, scientists themselves are already in the system of prioritizing their research. Because if that wouldn't be the case, then why would scientists care if they publish in Nature, Cell and Science, if they publish in high impact factor journals with high citation index? Who cares? Wouldn't matter. You're just fulfilling your curiosity, right? So it doesn't matter, but it does, because you need to make a living out of it. And it also means they need to have funding. And that is completely irrespective if the funding is public or private, but the public does influence, the funding does influence the direction. Now, is that bad? Because it always has, so has anything really changed? But that is a fact of life. irrespective of where the money comes from, the people who give the money, whether it's governments or whether it's private agencies, are going to have an aim of why they're funding a certain thing. So in a way, you're already in a certain segment, and that has nothing to do with industry. Okay. So I would like to expand on my first postulate that I've just seen in the previous slide and say, well, natural science has always worked within certain constraints and for specific goals of those who fund it, and also for the individual interest or interests of those that work in it. Okay. So let's move on. The chap you've seen before is Sir Isaac Newton, gravitation, etc., etc. Albert Einstein, known for the theory of relativity. Now, what they did was something called descriptive science, much like Darwin, descriptive science. Much like a lot of botanists, actually, until the early 1900s, they drew plants, or they drew animals. Maybe they might have opened them up and looked at them, but it was extremely descriptive. When you do descriptive physics, what you need is you need to have a sharp mind, an extremely good mathematical skill, a pen and a piece of paper. But at some point, you need to take those theories and you need to test it, and you need to, which is what I call functional. And when you start doing things like that, and especially if you would take these two chaps here, until you can actually prove the theory of relativity and you go into things like black matter, you end up having to do things like this, which is the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, which is the sister organization of EMBL that Haldor mentioned to you in the beginning. Some of you might know CERN if you have read Dan Brown's book, Angels and Demons, because it was the antimatter that was created in the CERN laboratories that got stolen, and the hero in the film is Tom Hanks, actually got flown over in a supersonic plane to the Vatican to save the world. Some others of you might actually know it because there was a lot of stuff in the press that if, in fact, CERN turns on the Large Hadron Collider, and because they're interested in actually going back to the origins of the Big Bang and also into the analysis of black matter, that Geneva is going to disappear in a black hole. What I'm trying to say, actually, is that cost 3.1 billion euros. Now, I think compared to what Einstein did and what Isaac Newton did, who supposedly came upon the theory of gravity by sleeping under an apple tree, and whether an apple fell on his head or not, I think is irrelevant. I think you could buy a lot of apples, and you could probably buy a lot of pencils and a lot of paper from 3.1 billion euros. Okay? So, as a similarity, when you actually do oil excavation, if the oil's at the surface, it's pretty cheap to get out. It costs $6 on average. If you're actually doing a CO2 recovery, then it gets to be 30. If you're going to deep vents, it gets to be around 60. And the price increases and increases when you go to the Arctic. So similar to that, here's postulate 2. Scientific research is delving deeper and deeper into the fundamentals, and hence is becoming more and more expensive, okay? Because we're post-descriptive. Now, there's something called the circle of innovation that has been mentioned before, and the players have been mentioned, so I don't want to repeat that. But if you look at the taxpayers, so all of us, all of you pay taxes. If you don't put up your hand. The taxpayers actually fund science, and science, by science, I specifically mean basic research. So clinical studies for me are not science, basic research. Okay? What happens is science creates results, knowledge. And as Tim said before, there's actually this short loop here that usually what happens is that results get turned back into doing more science, and that creates more results, and it just goes around and around and around. However, I say that there's only a benefit to society and the taxpayer at the end if you actually develop these results into products, and those products actually enable society to have a better health. So these products need to be made available to society. And very simply, if I asked all of you to take a vote on what would you rather have? Would you rather have the 100 top publications of the last 50 years, scientific publications in your house? Or would you like to have those 5 drugs in your drawer that are going to make your health better when you fall ill? I'm sure the vast majority of you would say, I'd like to have the drugs. Now, I know that I'm being